when you're thinking about it with your team. So that define step is before you start to say, here's all of the data. Let me figure out an answer to this data. It's really about having a framework around how you're approaching the data. Are you approaching just one element of your data? Are we looking at just fundraising? Are we looking across our organization at all of our data? It can be any of that. But starting with define really helps us understand what we're trying to accomplish with our data. So we always start from this place of what questions do you have for your data? This step is often missed. So when you're in that data role, when you're in that leadership role, it's hard to start with just analyzing the data, which we often skip right to, if you don't know what you're looking to answer with the data. So really what questions are important to you in your organization. We've outlined a couple that we hear often, but are you creating the change you intended to create? Are you furthering your mission? Are we serving the communities we set out to serve? So here it's just a few examples of some of the questions that you may have for your data. And again, you may think of it your holistic data at your organization, or you may be thinking of one key element of your program data. And I shouldn't leave out our operations, our budget sides, our staffing side of it. There's questions you'll have for your data as well. Within that, there's also the community that you're working with. What do they need to know? We next step you into defining some basic key performance indicators, or KPIs. Where this is really helpful is this helps us keep on track. So those key performance indicators will guide us on whether we're going in the direction we've set out to go, or whether we're off and we need to shift some of our activities. What's really important here is that they're smart. So they're based on real data. They're established standards of measurement. They're easy to understand and communicate. You want to communicate these to all of your staff. You want to ground your staff meetings in these KPIs so that everyone is tracking to these same measurements. And you want to make sure that they empower everyone to make decisions. This is really important. If team members don't understand the importance of your KPIs, you want to make sure you're rallying them around your KPIs so that everyone knows we're moving in the same direction. The next step we'd recommend is you implementing a measurement plan. Now, my throwing these words on the screen, don't panic or fall off your chairs. I know a measurement plan is much more than just this one screen, but wanted to distill it down to some simple steps that you can do in order to create this measurement plan. Now, I've been talking holistically about your organization's data. This is where I'm going to hone us in really on the mission and those programs that you're running. What are you trying to achieve? What is that impact, that longer term behavior that you're trying to shift? Understanding that and undergrounding in this measurement plan will really help you identify and track the right data points to help support that. You see here the next step is understanding what activities and outputs are needed to really drive towards that impact. We then recommend you grouping those activities into specific strategies. So what groups of activities are required to run the program? And then finally, defining the outcomes that your strategies generate. You may have seen this on a continuum where you can map that out. We recommend that too, using like the whiteboard behind me, starting with that impact statement, and then working back through these questions for your organization. It can be much simpler than we make it. And the recommendation here is really starting small. Okay, I went really heavy. Now I'm going to go back up to a broader place of understanding. So we're talking about data. We're asking you to think about your data. We're asking you to invest in your organization's data. What's really important and what many organizations miss is understanding your data capacity. What is the understanding of data at your organization? Are there resources available to invest in data? What resources are available? Is it dollars? Is it software? Is it people? Do you have a data strategy? Do you have a data champion? Now, these seem really basic questions, but this is really important for you to understand that data takes investment. It's investment in people. You need people time to think about, to ask these questions, to manage that data, to think about that data, to extract and analyze that data. So really understanding this helps you as an organization make sure you have the resources you need to achieve what you're trying to do with your data, and or communicate out to your funders and or others that you need help in this area. This I want to shout from the rooftop, because the past year with funders, this huge shift is happening. And I know you're saying maybe we're not seeing the shift as much, but they are trying to make it easier to do business with them. And one of the areas they recognize is the need for organizations to have data capacity, and they're willing more than ever to invest in data capacity. But you need to tell them, and they need to understand it from their grant partners. Another important part of this is your data culture. So understanding the strengths of the current culture, is data front and center at your leadership team meetings, at your staff meetings? If it's not, what will that shift take culture-wise? What needs to drop from that meeting so you focus more on the data? What are the bright spots? Where do we rally around data? We serve this many kids, or this many students got into college, or our fundraising dollars increased by X amount. What are those moments in time at your organization where you celebrate data? Recognize those, and recognize that you can use those to pivot on and create something bigger. With your data culture, always we want to recognize behavior and help educate your team members. We don't want data to be something that gets put on a job. We want you to encourage your teams to embrace the data and run with the data. The next thing, these are some heavy things I'm so excited to share with you. And Jen, if there's any questions coming in, if you want to jump in and ask. We also want you to conduct a data landscape. So this is where really mapping out where your data lives today. So we started the webinar today talking about all the data that you're sitting on top of, but have you ever thought of that? Has it been mapped out in one place? Do you have data in a fundraising database? Do you have it in a program database? Is it in Excel? Is it in Google Sheets? Is it in a Drive? But really mapping out what the data is, where it lives, who has access to that data, and then who those key owners or key champions of that data is. That landscape analysis is another way that you can really ground your organization and coalesce your organization around the data and your data strategy. It's also an opportunity for you to understand what data is missing. Are you asking your participants, board, your community, how they're doing? Are their needs being met? What else can your organization be doing to help support them? Are you asking them that today? Well, you have to figure out if you need that data and information. Also, this is also a point in time to understand that data that can drive your decision making and drive your action doesn't just exist within your walls. There's often data that's publicly available that can help you understand your community better, can help you understand your donors better. So understanding too what data gaps you might have and where to get those. So when you're looking at how data can really help you drive your organization, drive your impact, thinking too about what else you want to know or need to know about your community. And I said this already, but I'm going to reinforce this message of really understanding the needs of all of your stakeholders. This is a time, it's a incredibly significant time that we're living through where people's lives are changing overnight. You've set out with your mission at a certain point in time, but are you asking your community whether their needs are being met? Are you sure that you are working within the communities that you set out to serve? This is an opportunity to pull in feedback from all of your stakeholders into what you're doing, and using that data to help you drive your organization. Our next grounding step is around collecting. So I started to talk about that already, but making sure you're collecting all of this data. So we've mapped it out, we understand what we need, but now we want to bring it together to make sure we're looking at the data together. Now, if you're in fundraising and you look over a program and you say, maybe I don't need that information. I don't think you're going to say that. But if you said that, this is the point in time to understand why that program data is important for fundraising, and for the program team to understand why that fundraising data is important, and then for the budget team to understand why the fundraising and program data is important. But again, pulling that data together all in one centralized place. So as an organization, you're not looking at these pockets of data, you're looking at your holistic organizational impact data. So there's a number of ways that you can collect the data. I mentioned the asking your community. You can use surveys. You can use program or organizational data. You could pull that public data in. You could pull those stories in, but collecting them in one place to really coalesce around that data. This slide is interesting because I could have put this in any of our process steps so far, but it's so important. Maybe I should have repeated it in each bucket, but to make sure that you're applying an equity lens to your data. So this is often an afterthought, and today's conversation is an opportunity for us to think about in advance the biases that might be represented in the data. So when asking your community specific data, make sure that you're pulling any representation bias out of that data, that you're extracting any interpretation bias by team members. This is incredibly important to make sure that the communities that you're working to solve and all communities are represented in your data. The more you focus on outcomes and really refining your outcomes, it really helps you take that equity lens to your data. So I wanted to make sure we mentioned that. I mentioned coalescing your data in one place. So making sure that that data is brought together. And now the key part, we want to analyze the data. So your data is all in one place. We want to go back to those questions that we originally started with. And by now you might have your organization-wide questions, and you might group those questions into specific buckets. But now you want to analyze the data to actually answer the questions that you need answered. And what I often say, and I'm probably going to say to our team here at Metrics again today, is making sure you start small. Do we want to answer the 100 questions that we have a list of for our data? Yes. But start small, because that's manageable. Start with what's most important for you as an organization or your specific team to answer, and make sure you're getting to those key results that will help drive you around those questions. Okay, we've analyzed that big step. We have the data in front of us. What are we going to do with it now? So is it static data? Are we going to leave it in this one place? How often are we going to update this data? But now we have the data to actually say, are we serving the communities we set out to serve? Are they representative of the populations we've set out to work with? Are we focused on the right donors? Have we been really focused on our 10 high net worth individual donors, and we haven't paid attention to 90% of our donor database? But this is really the opportunity for you to really use that data to help drive change at your organization or the organization that you're going to work for. So what did you learn from your data? Did you understand your impact? Do you have the data to drive your decision making? Maybe these results help you see some gaps in the data that you have. Does this data actually encourage action, or does this data encourage stagnation? Does your data help improve collaboration? And are you capturing and sharing your story? I was going to say I'm going to talk more about your story in a moment. Is the data at this point in time something that we stop thinking about and stop looking at and know? You need to make sure your data is live and the data analysis that you do is present. So again, bringing it back to your culture and the consistency at your organization, making sure you're putting that live data front and center, and that you're explaining to your team why you're shifting in this direction based on the learnings from that data. And then we'll always encourage you to iterate, right? So you have that live data, you're learning. For you fundraisers, let's say you're looking at your donor lifetime value. What are you learning from that, and what are you going to shift and change based on that data? Who you're focused on, how you work with your donors, how you work to retain your donors in the short and the long term. And then this is where I said I'm most passionate about how do we communicate our impact, and how do we make sure that our impact and our communication of our impact gets on the airwaves and gets the attention that it needs. There's a few key ways that we really recommend. So grounding that impact in the data. You've tracked these data points, you're tracking your impact. Now, there may be a question coming through that says, Annie, impact is not a short-term result. Jen mentioned I worked at the Ford Foundation. We did women's leadership training, a grant for women's leadership in Indonesia 15 years ago. Is that impact? We might see that impact, in the past 5 years. Are those women now leaders of organizations? Potentially, right? That's a longer term impact. But there are short wins in your impact. And so that's why it's important to understand those activities, those outputs, understand those outcomes, so that shorter change of behavior. But if you have results to share those results. People are looking to invest in impact. And so the more you can share those results and share it with an impact language, the more attention your donors, your funders will pay to the work that you're doing. The other important piece here is not just that external audience, right? So making sure that your whole team is grounded around your impact goals and your impact achievements, making sure everyone is working from that same consistent playbook around communicating your impact. The reason why this is important is the consistency. Is the board telling the same story? Is your operations team telling the same story to who you're hiring? Are your fundraising and programs team telling the same story? It's an imperative that you work from that same playbook. And then storytelling. So why is this important? And we don't have enough time to go into depth of why storytelling is important. But it's really that last point is one that I always land on. As somebody who spends a lot of time in the data, is that story really helps stand that data up, and it gives it legs and it gives it life. And the storytelling is about the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. It's a simpler and easy way to share your impact if your data isn't there yet. Telling that story of a change in somebody's life or in a program or in a community, that gets the attention, and that's what people will remember. Are numbers enough to drive action? So yes, but it's the stories that help you share some of the complexity. So the example I gave with the Ford Foundation grant, the stories were what we could tell the young women who are being trained as leaders and then going back to their community and training other young women as leaders. That was a story we could tell within the year of that grant. That's still a story of impact. And so that's also important to recognize. It's also a way to share very complex ideas. I know many of you are working for many amazing, somewhat complex organizations. It's also a way to help people understand what you're working towards, and excite them about the work that you're doing. Your story inspires action. For this example here, right? Action. We have volunteers working together. Now, I just told you a story with this visual. I didn't tell you the story. The visual told you a story. But this is also an important aspect of stories. I am talking about stories as if it's something only I can tell you or orate. But the visual also helps tell a story. So think too about the means of communicating that story. And the secret to a good story is data and strategy. So making sure you're measuring your change through those data-driven stories. Be strategic about what you're looking for. What do you need to get there? Gather the data that matters, and use the story to get people to take action, whether that's volunteering, whether that's donating, whether that's participating on your board. And then I think almost finally, the strengthening and collaboration with the funders. So all of this work that you've done to understand your data, understand where your data lives, bring your data together, connect your team around your data, connect your community around your data. This matters to your funders. And I'm putting your funders in a big bucket. They could be private funders, corporate funders, government funders. It's important for them today to understand what your data capacity needs are, as I've shared with you earlier. Let them know what you learned from your data. So the other shift that's happened with funders is they're trying to move away from the funder has a certain impact and they're going to tell you what impact they're trying to achieve. what they're starting to look at, and not everyone's here, so you can tell on them if they're not here yet, the funders you're working with. But what they're starting to say is the organizations we're funding know more about what outcomes and what impacts in the communities that they're serving than we do as their funders. So how can the grant partners or organizations on the ground educate those funders? And more than ever, program staff at foundations are looking to learn from you and learn from the community. I know this because many of them are using our tools and technology to connect with you and to ask you, how are things going? What are you learning from the community? It's important. There's one foundation we work with in Kansas City who is actually working with their grant partners to engage community members to tell them what they need. Are their needs being met? What changed in this past year for them? Are the organizations on the ground meeting those needs? The opportunity here to communicate any data you're learning, those foundations are so hungry for it, to make sure that they're doing what they set out to do, right? If they're funding the communities that really match what their missions are. It's important, and we could talk about the power dynamic or the traditional power dynamic between funders and their grant partners. But really, if you lead with data and you share your progress towards the goals and communicate your impact, you tell your story, the funders may take credit for that. And I apologize if there's any funders on the line today, but you're educating them, and that leading with data also gives them an opportunity to have a clear understanding of what they're investing in with you and where that investment will go. And that we're going to continue to see that as a need with funders going forward. I said funders, and I wanted to add a slide about stakeholders. Your board, your staff, the community you're serving, the broader community, wherever you are, Europe. You want to make sure that you share with everyone what your data capacity needs are. This is a conversation we often don't bring to the boardroom, but we need to bring to the boardroom in terms of an investment in data, where your organization will focus, what they really need. Really embracing your data strategy can really change the way your organization is run, but your stakeholders need to know what you need. Communicate back with your community what you learn from them. Really important for anyone, if you're participating in a survey or feedback, to close that loop. Let them know what you learned and what you're going to do about it. Let the data help guide you. So we're not asking you to take away your intuition, your experience, but using the data again to ground you, to make sure that you're just iterating, learning, and growing. Make sure to apply a data lens. Again, I mentioned this could have gone in any section within here, and always lead with the data. So Jen, I'm going to pause there for Q&A.
Questions. There have been questions coming in through the chat, Annie. This is really valuable stuff. And I love what you said too about like not removing some of the strengths that you might find in intuitive kind of understanding of your work, but really actually adding onto it with a strong and grounded comprehension of data. So that's really exciting. And thank you so much. One of the questions that's coming in is, regarding, so our own amazing Be Social Change member, Anne Friedman, asks, We are a nonprofit that mobilizes LGBTQ plus and ally volunteers, and we collect data related to the number of volunteers, hours served, number and type of nonprofit served, and stories about the volunteers. But we struggle to measure changing hearts and minds in the broader community, which is the core of why they exist. And so her question is kind of, do you have ideas on how we might measure or capture this type of data? Or to kind of broaden it, do you have ideas for how organizations can think about their impact, you know, in the changing hearts and minds category of things and in even a broader community?
Thank you so much for that question. I love it. And I think we could spend a whole session on answering it. So thank you for that. I'd start with where I ended with the story, that anecdote, right? The what changed, what that participation really means for those individuals that are engaging with you in your organization. That's the piece that'll stick with the heart and minds. Using that data, right, where the story is going to stand up that data, how many participants, you know, what changed in the life of participants? Are the participants safe and included? And have they learned whatever those changes that you're tracking, but capturing that story, and whether it's the individual volunteers or the participants, I'd say either one is where I'd really ground on, but I'd love to continue thinking that through with you, and really looking at some of that data that you are capturing, so we can pull out those elements that will help stand that up.
That's awesome. Thank you. And great question. Thank you for asking. If anybody else has questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and we will get to them. Michelle asks, in line with Anne's question, how do we manage the measurement bias of easy to measure concepts versus hard to measure concepts? How do we tackle technological and ideological barriers that affect the perception and reality of what is measurable?
Ooh, there's some real zingers here with the Be Social Change community. Thank you so much. Can I say I don't know? So no, I'm going to say I don't know, right? So I think this also could lead to a further conversation. For me, it would be helpful to understand the data that you're looking at in this question. So maybe I could follow up with you, and I'm looking at you directly, Michelle, if we could have a further conversation about that.
Absolutely. Thanks. I'll connect on LinkedIn. Okay.
Great.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's a really interesting question too. It's got all of my gears turning. Another question from Sonia. She asks, in addition to Anne's question, the 4 departments in their organization tracks the data differently due to different funder needs. And they struggle with creating an annual impact report because of that. Do you have any ideas or examples from other organizations on how to address that?
So this one is one that comes up often. So everyone here is nodding because everyone has some element of this at their organization. So I'm going to give you some guidance that the first steps of it will be a little cumbersome. And what I'm asking you to do is for you to own the data. So not have it always be responsive to what that funder needs and wants. Now I'm going to put a big asterisk there because for government grants, that's not always easy. I met an organization last year that was using 7 different systems to track 7 different government grants around the same program, right? Somebody was spending over 20 hours a week just tracking data for the program in these different systems. If you can start from the place of what data you want to track towards that impact, and then using that as the guide to then go communicate back with the funders. Now, some of that may be hard. As I said, some of the funders are shifting but they're using systems that they've been using for a number of years. Their systems aren't shifting as quickly as we would want them to. And using your framework to help educate them. Again, it sounds much easier for me to say on a webinar that, you need to own it, but you need to own it and help educate those funders on what your data priorities are and what your impact priorities are. That's the only way you're going to align. Otherwise, you'll always be responsive and the data won't fit. And that's a great conversation to have with some of the funders that you're working with.
I love that answer. It's really empowering what you just said.
Your data can be really empowering, but it has to be your data. I'm guilty of this, right? I was on the funder side. I was on the grant management software side. So I understand the challenge of the 20 different applications. I have a sister who's a fundraiser, right? And she has many applications with many usernames and passwords. She's entering different data into each of those systems. I understand the challenge, but your data can be really empowering, but you really need to own it and not be reactive. And that this is really a great opportunity or moment in time with all of the challenges we've had in the past 15 months to shift and educate your funders. They are desperate to learn from you. They're just not always asking.
Yeah.
Or don't know how to ask right now.
Such a good point. Mileta asks, can you provide some best practices to avoid data duplication?
Ooh, great question. So data duplication. So one is on that mapping out. So it depends on what data we're talking about. So if let's use fundraising as an example. If we're using one system for tracking our fundraising, or we're using multiple systems, the one system will have tools, or however you're looking at that data, to clean the data. And our team at UpMetrics can help you think about that, how to clean the data in the simplest form. If we're using multiple systems, that's often where the challenge is. That's where we have to pull that data out of those systems and centralize it in one place. We talked about the exercise of doing the landscape analysis of your data and where all that data lives. Understanding with that landscape analysis where there might be some duplication of effort and why we're doing it is at that next level. Drill down. We're talking about fundraising. We're collecting this because this person works with individual donors and this person works with events and this, right? And maybe they have different ways of tracking it and different ways of managing it. Identify that in your landscape analysis and figure out how you can coordinate towards that one centralized location to track that one donor or that one, event that you're running, to have that consistency. This is another one that could be a whole second session, but the team here at UpMetrics, this is an area we work with nonprofits a lot on, is how do we make sure that the data is clean before it enters into our UpMetrics platform, because we want to make sure you're getting to clear and consistent metrics within your data.
That's awesome. Stay tuned for more sessions on this, you all. It's a really great question. And we have one more question. Again, feel free to throw any questions that you might have into the chat. This one is from Michael, who asks, from a solopreneur or even a large organization's perspective, I'd imagine taking the time to collect data, then having it well organized, then analyzed, and doing things with it could be a strain on existing resources, especially the later steps. Oftentimes, solopreneurs or departments are busy and struggling to keep up with opportunities flowing in. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question. I have lots of thoughts on that. For the attendees who are at the smaller organizations, they're saying, oh, I'd love to be at a larger organization, have those resources. But as you said, those resources are often, headed in the various directions where everyone's focused. And it's less than 10% of nonprofit organizations have a solely dedicated data person at their organizations, right? Maybe it's closer to 15 in the past few years. I think it's important to have a key data champion. So even if it's someone's part-time job, have them be the captain of your data. And helping everyone across the team to think about data and prioritizing data. That really needs to come from like a leadership directive to say, we're going to prioritize data, we're going to make this space within this person's role, or we're going to hire somebody to be our data leader, data champion, to help advise and direct everyone on their data. So I don't know if I fully answered the question. It's another one that it's hard to do because people say, okay, data isn't a priority, but there is a great case for a data return on investment, right? You'll, with the clean data, with the focus data, you'll know who to focus your fundraising efforts on. With the clean data, focus data, you'll know what parts of your program are really working, right? There's real ROI that can help you from a program side scale your programs to be able to do more. It's just understanding that ROI and creating that business case so that you can fill that capacity need. I hope I answered that question, but it's a great one.
It's such a great one. We definitely experienced that at Be Social Change, and we have a data champion, and it makes all the difference, and it has impacted all of our work for the better. But it was a strong lift for a small team, and I'm really glad we did it. So thank you so much for that answer too, Annie. We have one more question from Michael. Are there good existing resources for those more concerned with ethics of how we collect data?
Ooh, great question. I do have some resources. I don't have them at hand right now. So if you want to send me an email, it's an area that we've been thinking about and helping support organizations on. So we've also been doing research, asking the measurement and evaluation folks at many organizations, like what are they using in terms of resources? So that is also a follow-up question, but great one.
Awesome. Maybe we can include some of those resources in the follow-up emails that we'll send. That'd be great. I'm not seeing any other questions, and I am seeing that it's almost 2:00 here on the East Coast. And I just want to say a huge thank you, Annie, for this incredible session. I didn't realize how awesome data could be, and thinking about it in the ways in which you've outlined here have just further reaffirmed the importance of it for an organization like ours, and I think for all organizations that are looking to make an impact in the world. So a huge, huge thank you to you and the folks at Appmetrics. And maybe just one more time in case people missed it, would you be willing to share the best way for people to contact you after this if they have questions?
Sure. Send me an email, Annie@appmetrics.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'd love to learn more about, what's working with your data. So let's start from the positive place, and then where you're challenged with data, what questions you have. The data space is moving so quickly, so much is changing, but there's never been more of an interest or focus from the impact nonprofit space to really harness our data and use that data to learn from and drive action. So thank you, Jen and Be Social Change, for this opportunity.